Tonight, we unravel a tale from the misty edges of Japan, a story of restless spirits, forgotten promises, and a light that beckons in the dark. Light a candle if you dare, for this is The Lantern in the Fog. Imagine a small coastal village nestled between jagged cliffs and a restless sea. It's the kind of place where the fog never truly lifts, clinging to the earth like a shroud. The villagers of Kurogane have lived here for centuries, their lives governed by the tides and the whispers of the old ways. They speak little of the past, but every child knows one rule: never follow a light into the fog. It began with Hana, a young woman who arrived in Kurogane 3 months ago. She wasn't from the village. No one knew where she came from, only that she appeared one stormy night, soaked to the bone, clutching a small, tattered suitcase. Her eyes were wide and searching, her voice soft but firm. She asked about a man named Daichi, said he was her fiancé, said he'd written her letters promising a life together here. The villagers exchanged glances, but said nothing. Daichi had been dead for 10 years, drowned when his fishing boat sank in a sudden squall. No one told Hana. They figured she'd leave when she realized he wasn't coming. But Hana stayed. She rented a crumbling house at the edge of the village, its wooden beams warped by salt and time. She spent her days wandering the cliffs, calling Daichi's name into the wind, her voice swallowed by the crashing waves below. The villagers watched her from behind shuttered windows, their whispers growing darker. "She's stirring things," they'd say. "She's calling what shouldn't be called." One night, the fog rolled in thicker than anyone could remember. It wasn't just mist. It was alive, curling through the streets like fingers, pressing against doors and windows. Hana sat in her house, the oil lamp flickering as she reread Daichi's last letter. The ink was smudged, but she knew it by heart. "Meet me by the cliffs when the lantern lights your way." She'd never understood that line, until now. Through her window she saw it, a faint, golden glow bobbing in the distance just beyond the edge of the village. It wasn't the sharp beam of a flashlight or the steady pulse of a lighthouse. It was soft, warm, like a flame trapped in glass. A lantern. Her breath caught in her throat. She grabbed her coat, her boots slipping on the wet floor as she stumbled outside. The fog swallowed her instantly, muffling the world until all she could hear was her own heartbeat and the distant crash of the sea. The light moved ahead of her, always just out of reach. She called out, "Daichi, is that you?" But the only answer was the wind, low and mournful. She followed it up the winding path to the cliffs, the ground slick beneath her feet. The air grew colder, heavier, and she swore she heard whispers, fragments of voices, overlapping, pleading. "Turn back," they seemed to say. "He's not yours." But Hana pressed on, her desperation louder than her fear. At the cliff's edge, the lantern stopped. It hovered there, suspended in the fog, its light casting strange shadows on the rocks. And then she saw him, Daichi. He stood with his back to her, his fisherman's coat dripping with seawater, his hair plastered to his skull. She reached out, tears streaming down her face. "Daichi, I found you. I came for you." He turned slowly and Hana froze. His face wasn't his, not entirely. His skin was pale as bone, his eyes hollow pits that wept black water. His mouth stretched into a smile that was too wide, too wrong. "You came," he said, his voice a rasp, like waves grinding against stone. "I've waited so long." She stumbled back, but the fog thickened, trapping her. The whispers grew louder, angrier, and she realized they weren't coming from the wind. They were coming from him, from all around her. Shapes began to emerge from the mist. Other figures, their bodies twisted and broken, their clothes sodden and torn. Fishermen, women, children, all lost to the sea, all tethered to this place. And at their center, Daichi, or what had once been Daichi. "You called me," he said, stepping closer. His hand reached for her, skeletal fingers glistening with brine. "You brought me back." Hana shook her head, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to find you. I didn't mean—" But he cut her off. "The sea doesn't forgive. It takes and it keeps. I promised you a life, didn't I? Now you'll stay." The lantern flared, its light searing her eyes, and she screamed as the figures closed in. Their hands were cold, their grip unyielding, pulling her toward the cliff's edge. She fought, clawing at the ground, but the fog drowned her cries. The last thing she saw was Daichi's face, his hollow eyes fixed on her as the sea roared below. The next morning, the fog lifted. The villagers found Hana's house empty, her suitcase still by the door, Daichi's letter crumpled on the table. They didn't speak of it. They didn't search. They knew better. But that night, a fisherman swore he saw two lights in the fog, one golden, one new, a faint blue glow weaving beside it. Weeks passed, and the whispers grew. Travelers passing through Kurogane began to report strange things. A woman's voice calling from the cliffs, a lantern flickering in the mist. Some followed it, drawn by curiosity or something deeper. None returned. The villagers boarded their windows tighter, their prayers sharper. They knew the sea had claimed another, and the Yurei, the restless dead, had grown stronger. And so, the rule remains. Never follow a light into the fog, because out there, in the cold and the dark, they wait. Daichi, Hana, and all the others the sea has taken, their lanterns burning with a hunger that never fades. If you like this tale of vengeance in the void, subscribe to Mythwoven Sagas and ring the bell, because the shadows have more stories to weave. Tell me in the comments, would you follow the lantern or turn back while you still could? Until next time, keep your eyes on the light and your feet on solid ground.